Hi students, cordial greetings of the day. Today I am going to discuss two important chapters in the second block in your first year textbook. The title of the block is Words and Deeds. The first chapter, And Then Gandhi Came by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, clearly speaks about the perfect relationship between words and deeds. It clearly speaks about the symbiotic relationship between words and deeds. There we have seen a man who practiced what he preached. There we have seen Mahatma Gandhi who practiced what he preached. Now we have some idea about the views, ideals, dreams of Mahatma Gandhi. We have a different understanding of Gandhiji now. When we move on to the next two chapters, the second one, Price of Flowers by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyaya, and the third chapter is Death the Leveler by James Shirley. Today I am going to discuss these two chapters. The Price of Flowers by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyaya and Death the Leveler by James Shirley, a 16th century English poet. At first, we have a look at Price of Flowers by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyaya. Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyaya was a Bengali short story writer and novelist. Actually, the original version of this story was written in Bengali and later it was translated by Leela Ray. Most of his short stories, most of his novels deal with reality, speak about real life situations. Most of his works are realistic. Most of his works speak about lifelike situations, events, lifelike characters, etc. They all speak about the hopes and aspirations, joys and sorrows, agony and anxiety of these characters. The chapter Price of Flowers beautifully portrays the life of an impoverished English family. The questions that you can expect from that particular chapter, Price of Flowers, are character sketches of the three main characters in the story. The main three characters in the story are Mr. Gupta, Maggie and Mrs. Clifford. There is another character in the story, Mr. Frank. Even if his physical presence is not there in the story, his presence can be felt throughout the story. He was the son of Mrs. Clifford, a British soldier working in India, but unfortunately he got killed in one of the encounters on the border. I have already told you, one question that you can expect in your final examination is a character sketch of any of these three main characters in the story. A character sketch of Mr. Gupta, Miss Maggie or Miss Clifford, and the last one, a character sketch of Mrs. Clifford. Mrs. Clifford and Miss Maggie belong to an impoverished English family. Maggie was a 13-year-old teenager. She was anxious looking with a sad expression and she had large eyes. She always had a sad expression on her face. She was very considerate. She was respectful. She loved her mother so much and she took the responsibility of her family on her tender shoulders as she was working as a typist in a nearby shop. Another important trait of this young girl was that she was willing to sacrifice anything for her family members. She was willing to sacrifice a hard-earned shilling to buy flowers to be placed on the grave of her loving brother, Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank was killed in an encounter on the border. and she was willing to sacrifice a hard-earned shilling to buy some flowers to be placed on her grave. And she offered that shilling to Mr. Gupta. She was willing to sacrifice anything for her family members. She was very considerate. She was very respectful. She loved her family so much. She was affectionate. She was tender-hearted. These are some of the expressions that you can use to describe the character of Maggie. The second important character in the story is Mr. Gupta. Mr. Gupta was a civil services trainee who was undergoing training in England. He had been there in England for some 2 or 3 months, and he happened to meet an impoverished English family which consisted of Mrs. Clifford and her daughter Maggie or Miss Clifford. He can be considered as a typical Indian who can accommodate others irrespective of their caste and financial status. A typical Indian can accommodate anyone irrespective of his caste or financial status. He happened to get acquainted with Miss Maggie and her mother, Mrs. Clifford. He was very kind and sympathetic. He was even ready to assist the Clifford family financially. He was willing to tell a lie to save the life of Mrs. Clifford, as Mrs. Clifford was sick because she had been traumatized by her anxiety and fears of her son who was working as a soldier in India. They had not known anything about Mr. Frank for so many months, and Mrs. Clifford and Miss Maggie were very anxious about the whereabouts of Mr. Frank. So Mr. Gupta was willing to tell that lie to save the life of Mrs. Clifford. He said that everything was perfect with Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank was safe in India. But we know that it was a lie. When he was telling that lie, actually Mr. Frank was killed in an encounter on the border. So we can say that Mr. Gupta was very sympathetic, he was very considerate, he was loving, and he was willing to help others. The next important character in the story is Mrs. Clifford, the mother of Miss Maggie. She was accommodating, she was hospitable, she was respectful, but there was a serious problem with Mrs. Clifford. She was sick. She was a widow and sick. Her son, Mr. Frank, was working as a soldier in British India, but unfortunately he got killed in an encounter on the border. The family members had not received any news from Mr. Frank for so many months, and because of that she had been very anxious. She was very anxious about the whereabouts of her son. Another important trait of her personality was that she was superstitious. She believed in crystal gazing, and she thought that if she could find an Indian, that Indian would be able to gaze into that crystal and would tell her about the whereabouts of her son Frank, who was working as a soldier in India. So Maggie invited Mr. Gupta to her family in the hope that Mr. Gupta would be able to tell the whereabouts of her brother Frank. She was sick, and her illness was worsened by her anxiety and fears about her son who was working as a soldier in India. In a nutshell, we can say that she was an ordinary, simple English woman who belonged to an impoverished family. So these are the three main characters in the story Price of Flowers by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay. The entire story speaks about the bonds of human relationship. The bonds of human relationship are very strong, and they are very complex that we may not be able to explain it. Words and deeds have a soothing effect. This story speaks about the soothing effect of words and deeds. In the first chapter in this block, We have seen the symbiotic relationship between words and deeds. But when we come to the second chapter, Price of Flowers, we see the soothing effect of words and deeds. Another question that you can expect from this particular chapter is prepare a write-up on significance of the title Price of Flowers. Flowers stand for our varied emotions. They have no price tag. They are attached to our emotions. In happy moments, flowers give us happiness. Flowers give us joy. On sad occasions, flowers give us consolation. So they stand for our varied emotions, and as a result, we may not be able to put a price tag on flowers. So the title is very significant. And towards the end, we find Miss Maggie offered her hard-earned shilling to Mr. Gupta to buy some flowers to be placed on the grave of her loving brother Frank. So flowers again symbolize sacrifice, symbolize love, affection, care, etc. So we cannot put a price tag on flowers. The value of flowers cannot be measured. They are priceless. Then you can expect some other questions. You can expect letters. After his arrival in India, Mr. Gupta received a letter from Maggie. What would be the content of that letter? You can also expect the reply letter of Mr. Gupta to Maggie. So these are some of the questions that we can expect from the chapter Price of Flowers. I repeat, the questions that you can expect in your examination are character sketches of these three characters, Mr. Gupta, Miss Maggie and Mrs. Clifford. The second question, prepare write-up on the significance of the title Price of Flowers. The third question, letters written either by Mr. Gupta or by Miss Maggie. So these are the questions that you can expect from the chapter Price of Flowers. Now we move on to the next chapter in the second block. The title of the chapter is Death to the Leveler. It's a beautiful poem written by James Shirley, an Elizabethan poet. Actually, this poem is taken from a very famous play written by James Shirley. The title of the play is The Contention of Ajax and Ulysses. This is a dirge or a funeral poem. A dirge is spoken at the death of the mighty warrior Ajax. The poem clearly speaks about the inevitability and inescapability of death. In the first chapter of this block, we have come across the importance of the symbiotic relationship between words and deeds. In the second chapter, another idea is highlighted, the soothing effect of words and deeds. And when we come to the third chapter, Death to the Leveler, we come across another important idea, the inevitability and inescapability of death. Death is inevitable, death is inescapable. It also glorifies the noble deeds of human beings. And the poem says, our noble deeds will be remembered forever. Nothing can outlive our death, but our noble deeds, our good deeds, noble actions will be remembered forever. So this is the message of the poem Death to the Leveler by James Shirley. We know actions speak louder than words. Here the poem speaks about the importance of noble actions. In the first stanza, the poet says, the glories of our blood and state are mere shadows. They are shadows. The figure of speech used is metaphor. The title itself can be considered as an exquisite metaphor. Death the Leveler. Death is considered as a leveler, something which levels. Or it can be considered as a situation where everything is immaterial. Where your caste, your creed, your sex, your status in the society, your blood relations, everything is immaterial. So before death, everything is insignificant, everything is immaterial. This is the significance of the title Death the Leveler. Everything is immaterial before death. Everything is insignificant before death. Another powerful figure of speech is used in the first stanza. In the third line, it is stated that there is no armor against fate. Here, fate is personified as a mighty warrior, and there is no armor against that mighty warrior. There is no armor against death. Nothing can protect you from death. Your family status, your position in the society, nothing will come to your aid at the time of your death. Death is inevitable. And the major idea the theme which gets highlighted in the poem is death knows no distinction between high and low, rich and poor, kings and clowns. So this is a universal theme, and that universal theme gets highlighted in the chapter Death the Leveler by James Shirley. Another figure of speech is used in the first stanza. Scepter and crown, they stand for royalty. Scythe and spade stand for peasants. The figure of speech used here is metonymy. Here, scepter and crown refer to kings. They refer to kings because of their close relationship with kings. Scythe and spade refer to peasants because of their close relationship with peasants, farmers. They are the tools of farmers. So the figure of speech used is metonymy. The poet says, death lays his icy hands on kings, and scepter and crown must tumble down, and in the dust be equal made with the poor crooked scythe and spade. That means at the time of death, even kings are made, important people are made equal with the poor people in the society. In the dust, they are made equal with the poor peasants. This clearly speaks about the fact that death knows no distinction between high and low, rich and poor, kings and clowns. In the second stanza, the poet speaks about the swordsmen, the mighty warriors who reaped the heads of their opponents in the battlefield. And after the victory, they raised victory memorials in the battlefield. But the poet says that even those victors, even those captors will soon or late creep to death like pale captives. The captor will become the captive before death. At the time of their death, they gave up their murmuring breath. Early or late, they stoop to fate. They surrender to fate, they surrender to death. So even the mighty warriors, they have to surrender to death. They have to stoop to fate. Finally, they have to give up their murmuring breath. In the final stanza, there's a beautiful figure of speech. The figure of speech used is oxymoron. The expression victor, victim bleeds. Usually, victims bleed in a battlefield, but even the victors, once the captor will become a captive, once the victor will become a victim before death. So, that expression communicates a lot of sense. Both the victor, victim bleed. The garlands on your brow, they will wither, and they cannot boast of your mighty deeds. Your mighty deeds, your victories, your glorious deeds in the battlefield will fade from history, will fade from the memory of people. The victory memorials that you erected in the battlefields, would wither away. The memories of these glorious deeds, mighty deeds, your victories would be faded from memory, would be faded from history. What will remain forever? So the poet says, only your noble actions, your noble deeds will be remembered forever. Only the actions of the just smell sweet and blossom in the dust. Only our noble deeds will be remembered forever. Our noble actions will be remembered forever. So this is the message of the poem Death the Leveler by James Shirley. So you can expect some annotation questions from this particular chapter. Certain lines will be there in your exam and you will be asked to identify the figures of speech. You will be asked to elaborate the meaning of those lines, etc. So these are some of the questions that you can expect from the chapter Death the Leveler by James Shirley. That's all for the day. Thank you.